Poe Dameron Volume 1 Black Squadron is the first of 5 trades that collect the complete, now finished Poe Dameron comics. Every trade was written by Charles Soule, and the art for the first 2 volumes was done by Phil Noto, with Angel Unzueta taking over the art in Volume 3. Volume 1 contains 2 arcs, Black Squadron and Lockdown, and each of them are 3 issues long. The book starts with Poe Dameron being summoned by Princess Leia to take on the mission of finding Lor San Tekka, the old man who died at the beginning of The Force Awakens, who, by the way, doesn't seem to have aged at all since he played the old heroin-addicted priest in The Exorcist. Poe traces his movements to a planet called Ovanis, and the entire place seems to have been inspired by the female reproductive system. First is the name, which is obviously inspired by ovaries. Second is the format of the caves, which have long tunnels going downwards from the surface to the main cave area. Thirdly is the fact that the main cave area contains a giant blue egg. It's clearly a physical representation of the female reproductive organs, and I think it's something a kid reading it is likely going to miss. The people that live there, known as the Creche, look after the egg in the hopes that it will lead them to salvation when it hatches. It's a good look at Faith, because as the leader of the Creche says at the end, she didn't know what was in the egg, but she had faith, and if you ask a lot of religious people, particularly Christians, they'll tell you faith leads to salvation. God can't help you if you don't believe in him. It's the same here. The creature in the egg couldn't have helped the people if they didn't have faith and nurture it for all these generations. I'm surprised at both of these subjects because I wouldn't have expected them to be in a Star Wars comic, and as I said, a kid reading this will probably be totally oblivious to it, but as an adult it's interesting to see how Poe reacts to all this and considers the others' points of view, and it serves to show that just because Poe doesn't agree with or understand the woman's beliefs, he's still accepting of them, and that's the real difference between the Resistance and the First Order, the Rebels and the Empire. Kerfuffles occur between the Resistance and the First Order, and while the rest of Black Squadron deals with the air combat outside the cave, Poe and BB-8 have to deal with what is by far the most annoying character since Disney took over, Agent Terex. Oh my god, this guy does not shut up. I was reading it and I thought the character was just rubbing me the wrong way, but then Poe tells the guy all he wants him to do is shut up, and how he's surprised when the guy actually shuts up for 2 seconds. It made me laugh because I felt relieved that it wasn't just me, and Soule had deliberately written the character to be like that. He's like a Jar Jar that you're meant to love to hate, not just hate. Eventually Terex orders his stormtroopers to burn the egg, at which point it hatches and a giant winged blue creature appears. It's humanoid, and when I say giant, I mean it's about 6 times the height of Poe. The Creche Elder tries to explain to it who they are and who the creature is to them, and to be honest, it went about as well as I expected it to. The creature screams and starts killing everyone, and even though I was fully expecting it, it was still pretty funny to see the Creche Elder's face when she realises how mistaken her beliefs were. Another creature appears out of nowhere, and I wasn't keen on that because it wasn't explained at any point in the book. It was just there because it was convenient. If it was in the egg when it cracked, then everyone would have seen it, and if it wasn't in the egg, then it must have been in the caves or travelled in from outside, and everyone would have seen it. But everyone was surprised that it existed, so I think that should have been explained better. Soule himself joined in on Twitter when we were talking about it, something he does all the time and something I appreciate as a fan, and he said the creature was always inside the egg, you just need to look closer. But I've been back through it and honest to God I can't find it. Maybe it's because of Noto's artwork, maybe I'm just a pleb, but for the life of me I can't see it. The first one and the second one start to fight it out, and it becomes apparent that this is no longer a Star Wars comic. It's Godzilla, with 2 kaiju going at it toe to toe and nothing anyone can do to control the situation. I do kind of wish Soule had reined it in a bit. I didn't mind the one creature, but when the second one came out of nowhere and they started going at it, it took control away from the characters and lost that Star Wars feel. It's the only thing in the comic I didn't like, and had that second creature not come along, I'm sure the Resistance would have found some other way to calm the first one down that felt more like it belonged in the Star Wars universe. That's pretty much it for the first arc. It introduces Poe and his team, which of course includes Snap Wexley, plus a few others I think are new. Apart from the giant monster fight, I liked Black Squadron. I think Soule wrote Poe well, and I enjoyed hating Terex, and that female reference is far beyond what I would have expected in a Star Wars comic, but that's not a bad thing. Black Squadron sets everything up ready for the second arc, which is the Lockdown arc. Lockdown sees Poe and the rest of Black Squadron following Lor San Tekka's trail to Megalox, a prison planet where the gravity is 10 times normal gravity, and prisoners are locked in by a shield that keeps gravity at a normal amount. If any prisoner tries to escape, they will be crushed with their own body weight. It's an inventive way to have a prison and keep the prisoners contained without actual walls, so kudos to Soule for that. I'm a bit confused as to how the galaxy works, to be honest. It's a private prison, so people can just put anyone in prison if they want? Isn't that kidnapping? Clearly the New Republic knows about it, so why are they letting people be kidnapped and sent to a prison like that? It makes absolutely no sense to me unless it's a privately built prison but still operates under New Republic jurisdiction. This isn't made clear in the comics, but something that may point to that is the amount of Hutts in there. Since Return of the Jedi, we've known Hutts run the underworld, so perhaps the New Republic cracked down on crime after the Empire escaped to the unknown regions. I don't know, it isn't made clear at any point, and it could be a case of, since it's a private prison, somebody hired bounty hunters to kidnap all the Hutts so they could take over the criminal underworld, so it really could be the option. It would have been nice if Soule had really made that clear. Either way, Black Squadron isn't going to see the prison itself, rather one of the prisoners, Gracchus the Hutt, who has been incarcerated in the prison since his capture in Star Wars Volume 1. I was so pleased when I saw the cover. See, this is one of the reasons I like each issue to have its cover at the beginning, even in trades. It gives me something to look forward to, just like as if I was reading an actual comic. In this case, the cover was a picture of Poe talking to Gracchus while holding a hologram of a young Luke Skywalker. Anyone who's read Star Wars Volume 1 will know why this is funny, but for those of you who don't, in that book Luke was kidnapped by Gracchus and forced to fight in an arena, then all hell broke loose when the Empire arrived. It's an excellent throwback to a completely different comic set in a completely different time, but this is why I like Charles Soule. He puts in the effort to connect things from the Lando comic to From a Certain Point of View to Poe Dameron, and even now with the current Darth Vader Dark Lord of the Sith comic, he tries to create a web of lore. Some of it might appear to be unimportant at first glance, like in Lando where he and Lobot see the Sith mask, but he always tries to come back to stuff to give it relevance, like the same Sith mask being in Dark Lord of the Sith. Terex is back and he's beaten Black Squadron to Gracchus, but Gracchus agrees to only tell one of them where Lor San Tekka is, and that person would be the one who breaks him out of prison, and this challenge led to what I thought was a pretty funny exchange between Poe and Gracchus. Mayhem then ensues, and it's all a lot of fun, and one notable thing for me was seeing the Carrion Spike, Tarkin's ship from his namesake book. It's a longer ship than I'd expected, but watching it in action was pretty cool. Seeing it tear up other ships made for a good battle scene, if a bit unbelievable. It's not clear to me yet exactly what order things are in now. We know Bloodline was set about 5 years before The Force Awakens, and we know that's when Princess Leia created the idea of the Resistance and started to put it into action. We know Phasma, the Poe Dameron comics, and the Resistance TV show take place in that time frame because the Resistance is in all three, but it's really quite murky to me now how it all plays together. For instance, in Phasma, it was explicitly stated that Cardinal was the only person to ever wear red armour, but in Resistance we see Major Vonreg walking around in red, so it must be after Phasma. But I just can't see Phasma getting all of Cardinal's power like she did in the book, then letting someone else have it instead of keeping it for herself. I've never read Before the Awakening because the lowest I will go in terms of age range in the books is the young adult novels, but my understanding is that Poe intercepted some information from a senator that was intended for the First Order, and that's referenced in Black Squadron, and brought it to Leia. This couldn't have been long before the events of Black Squadron since Phasma is still hiring people to find that information. Since the Poe Dameron story is about finding Lor San Tekka, and we know he completes that task at the beginning of The Force Awakens, it must run for that length of time, so I can't see how the Resistance TV show fits in. Maybe as I read the other 4 volumes I'll see a spot where it can fit in, but for now, after reading this, it seems like Resistance has been forced in just because Disney needed a new TV show and didn't really consider whether the timing and placement of the characters matched up with the rest of the canon. I'll wait and see, but I'm not optimistic. If there's one thing I know when it comes to Disney and Star Wars, it's that the TV shows are more important to them than the books and the comics are, and anyone who likes the books and comics can just go fuck themselves if Disney can find a way to make more shows at the expense of canon. As I've said so many times before, it's high time Disney introduced a proper timeline like we had in the Legends books. We need the old year system back and not just vague placements like the list at the beginning of the novels. That list doesn't even include the young adult novels, let alone the children's books. We need stuff to be written in order, and you know what? We deserve it. Why shouldn't we know what order things are in? If not having a proper timeline just causes a conflict of canon and a massive headache, why not just give us one full timeline that includes all the books and all the trades and the general names of the TV shows? That would help fans keep track, and it will certainly help the story group because they've clearly lost sight of any cohesive timeline. It's only authors like Charles Soule, Timothy Zahn and Claudia Gray that actually seem to care about creating stories that don't contradict anything else, and maybe if the story group had a timeline with dates on it, they could actually do their jobs properly and everyone would be happier. Clearly, I'm fucking dreaming. That will never happen because Pablo Hidalgo doesn't care enough, but it's what Star Wars sorely needs at the moment. Phil Noto's art is the same as always, and I really do wish he would bring back that depth of field effect he used in the Chewbacca comic. I have no idea why he used it to such great effect once and then stopped, because there were plenty of places where he could have used it in Black Squadron and it would have looked excellent. There are a few pages where he's used splash pages, which normally I don't mind, but in the case of Noto his work tends to be quite minimalistic. Good, but minimalistic, and when you take minimalistic art and blow it up like that, it doesn't look very good because there's not really anything more to look at. That's not to say his art is bad, just a bit sparse. I think Noto has proven himself to be a reliable workhorse for the Star Wars comics, and while he isn't my favourite artist by any means, I'm always happy to read a comic he's illustrated because apart from the depth of field thing, he is consistent and he never really suffers from dips in quality as some artists do. Chris Eliopoulos and Jordi Belair are back smearing their particular brand of shit all over what once again was an otherwise good comic, with their latest steaming pile of turd sabotage. You know, like BBA sabotage. It's another crap story that doesn't belong in these books. I know it came printed in one of the individual issues of Poe Dameron, and that's why it's here, but it shouldn't have been included in a comic like that. If they want to do shitty stories that have awful art and awful stories, by all means restart the Droids comics. Do it in its own thing, don't keep putting it in decent comics and bringing them down. It's a fucking piss take and I'm getting tired of seeing these shitty, lazy, poorly written, poorly drawn, poorly coloured strips at the back of every book. So overall, Poe Dameron Volume 1 is the kind of prequel I want for The Force Awakens. It nicely fills in the time between Bloodline and Episode 7, and seeing Poe track down Lor San Tekka is great because you know how it ends up, so it's a case of being about the journey, not the destination. Each arc in Black Squadron had something that I didn't quite get because of the way it had been portrayed, but in the grand scheme of things they weren't that important, and compared to what Soule has included and linked together, it's small potatoes. I'm also curious to learn more about Terex and how he got his hands on the carrion spike, so I'm looking forward to reading the next volume and finding out about his past, and I'm really looking forward to the day he's genuinely gobsmacked by something Poe does just so Poe can point it out. Noto's artwork is as reliable as ever, if not my favourite, and I think his art matched the tone and speed of the story. I hate to say it, but I really don't like Resistance. I find it so boring, which is a shame because I've been waiting for a show to come around that has that kind of graphical styling since the Spider-Man new animated series was released 15 years ago. Where the Poe Dameron comic has a clear destination in mind, and it's clear that the series is about the journey, Resistance has neither, and the show suffers because without those two things, it has to rely on childish slapstick comedy, and rather boring one-episode stories that don't have any impact on the overall universe because everything gets wrapped up in a nonsensical, unimportant plot. I mean, seriously, can anybody tell me why the First Order had to blow up that station in the mid-season finale? Sure, they were trying to hide the fact that they were building Starkiller Base, but is there a reason the station couldn't have been built with thrusters in the first place, or taken on board a Star Destroyer and hidden? Also, in the last episode of the first half of the first series of Resistance, we see Princess Leia in the flesh, and the conversation she has with Poe about not engaging the First Order is almost a carbon copy of the conversation at the beginning of Black Squadron. Seriously, word for word, it's almost identical. It just makes no sense to me because the storytelling is awful and pointless, and as a prequel it doesn't tick any boxes for me, whereas Poe Dameron has a clear destination in mind and it's all about how we get to that opening scene in The Force Awakens. I'll see if Resistance gets any better with Series 2, but I'm much more looking forward to reading Poe Dameron Volume 2 because the first volume was pretty good. It's clearly going somewhere and it was so much better than Resistance.